Hi there, this is Robert Thibodeau of the mayflowerbookshop.com on the web and on YouTube with songs and talks. Today I'd like to share with you the secrets of the voice of the silence. At the end of H.P. Blavatsky's life, H.P. Blavatsky being the person, the woman, who started the Theosophical Society in the late 1800s. Out of Theosophy came people like Rudolf Steiner, who was the head of the esoteric school of Theosophy in Europe and one of the leaders of the Theosophical Society in the world, before he parted after Blavatsky had died, with difficult interactions between Leadbeater and Annie Besant, leaders of the Theosophical Society at the time. Rudolf Steiner left Theosophy and started Anthroposophy. So the wisdom of God became the Anthroposophy, the wisdom of manas, or thinking, or man, and woman or man. But also Manly Hawes studied Theosophy and Rudolf Steiner. Einstein read The Secret Doctrine by Blavatsky and more. Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Gandhi was given the Bhagavad Gita by Judge, a friend of Blavatsky's, who started the Theosophical Society with her. And Gandhi got the Bhagavad Gita and read into Theosophy, and Martin Luther King Jr. read it because Gandhi did, for one reason, and was really following it for a while. So Theosophy is the mothership of all metaphysics and esoteric sciences to come. Just like Neoplatonism, which influenced Blavatsky's writing of Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, all of her writings. You can read about it in the introduction to Isis Unveiled, a book that Rudolf Steiner claimed Christian Rosenkreutz wrote through Blavatsky. So I'm giving you a little bit of the history and background, but today I want to talk about the voice of the silence. At the end of Blavatsky's life, she was worried that nobody was going to understand her and that they would miss her message. And she wrote The Key to Theosophy for the Logical Mind, the simple mind, the thinking. And she wrote The Voice of the Silence for the Heart of Intuition, hoping that these books would be something that everybody could grasp. And I strongly advise you to take a good look at The Key to Theosophy, but especially look at the mystic treatise, the self-initiation manual of The Voice of the Silence. The Voice of the Silence is divided into 3 parts. All great initiation processes to enlightenment and spiritual unfoldment of all ancient times were 3 degrees. Originally, Masonry was 3 degrees, and according to Isis Unveiled, the Jesuits infiltrated and created more degrees, going all the way to 33 degrees, to take you in circles nowhere and to give you substitute secrets. So she says in Isis Unveiled, very interesting fact, and that all ancient initiation systems and modern day ones consists of 3 degrees. That's why the esoteric school of Theosophy of H.P. Blavatsky, the EST, was 3 degrees. And perhaps this is why Rudolf Steiner's first class, which was going to be followed by the second and third, was of 3 degrees. And this is why in modern anthroposophy, and perhaps Theosophy too, that the Atma Buddha Manas, or the spirit self, life spirit and spirit man, transforms the thinking and feeling and willing. These 3 degrees transform the higher 3, transform the lower 3, and our soul, or our sense of ego, or I am, is literally crucified between the spirit and matter, the higher and lower self. And the voice of the silence, it's crucified or resurrected or initiated, much like Odysseus going through the intermittently clapping rocks to get home, so did Jason and the Argonauts. The idea of going between the 2 pillars of heaven and earth, walking into the door of the inner temple, the Holy of Holies. So to make it simple for you, get The Voice of the Silence. You can buy it at Mayflower Bookshop. You can get it online. Make sure you have the photographic facsimile of the original. You can find it online at the Theosophical University Press for free. And The Voice of the Silence is divided into 3 parts. The Voice of the Silence, the 2 Paths, and the 7 Portals. The Voice of the Silence is a self-initiation treatise. If you read it slowly and think about it, meditate on it, take notes, you can come to some very deep understanding. The Voice of the Silence, the first chapter, talks about moving through 3 halls, a threefold self. The hall of ignorance, the hall of learning, and the hall of wisdom. We could say this is the physical etheric astral body, or is the physical, mental, and then the heart between the lower and upper third as being the hall of wisdom. I think depending on each individual and the path they choose and their teachers and their experience and their learning, one is left through direct experience and freedom to interpret this for themselves. Our suffering is the greatest teacher, but it's always great to learn fun, wonderful, beautiful, good, true, beautiful things that inspire and spark us and put our negativity to rest and lift us, our spirit, and so high. It's a little more fun than just suffering. I mean, Buddha talks about right suffering, of course. The right suffering is that which brings you into learning and wisdom. So Blavatsky talks about the 3 halls: the hall of ignorance, the hall of learning, and the hall of wisdom. And she talks about getting to this hall of wisdom by going through each of these stages. She says, give up your life if you would live. So we're giving up the outer life of desire and fear, perhaps. 3 halls, O weary pilgrim, lead to the end of toils. 3 halls, O conqueror of Mara or illusion, will bring thee through 3 states into the 4th, and thence into the 7 worlds, the worlds of rest eternal. Well, this whole idea of 3 and 7, of course, is Kabbalistic from ancient Babylonia. But let's continue. If thou wouldst learn their names, then hearken and remember. The name of the first hall is ignorance, avidya. The hall of the second is the hall of learning. She warns that all learning are like these flowers that have a serpent that would bite you underneath the flower, So that, knowledge alone is the booby prize. Knowledge alone is the booby prize when you don't really get it, the enlightenment. The head is superior, as the old India claimed. The head is superior, but the heart is supreme. So it's when we go to the 3rd hall of wisdom, beyond which stretch the shoreless waters of Ashara, the indestructible fount of omniscience. Wow. So this going through this astral region, the psychic world of suprasensuous perceptions and the deceptive sights, is kind of a world of mediums, she claims. And no blossom plucked in those regions has ever yet been brought down to earth without its serpent or trouble coiled around the stem. This is the world of the great illusion. And you think of Persephone picking flowers and being brought to the underworld in a form of initiation, that the higher spiritual soul, the daughter of our higher self, is pulled into the underworld to experience physical, emotional, mental, and to identify with the higher manas, or the higher spiritual thinking, and the higher spiritual buddhi or compassion, and the universal truth, Atma. To raise oneself from the dead thinking, and dead feelings, and the deadened physical world to a higher awareness. So this region of the full spiritual consciousness, beyond which there is no longer danger for the person who's reached it. So these are those three haws. And she also mentions not to let your heaven-born merged in the sea of Maya. In other words, that eternal spark within our deepest heart that's merged. We have something that's eternal within us, the eternal in the passing moment. I talked about it in another talk. She says, let not thy heaven-born, merged in the sea of Maya, or illusion, break from the universal parent, the universal soul, but let the fiery power retire into the inmost chamber, the chamber of the heart, and the abode of the world's mother. Then from the heart that power shall rise into the sixth, the middle region, the place between thine eyes, the single eye or the third eye, right? When it becomes the breath of the one soul, the voice which filleth awe, thy teacher's voice. 'Tis only then thou canst become a walker of the sky, who treads the winds above the waves, whose step touches not the waters. So this inner chamber of the heart, called in Sanskrit Brahma Pura, the fiery power of Kundalini. Blavatsky talks about this Kundalini of the heart versus the Kundalini of the descent of the flames on the apostles in the upper room, perhaps the head, right? The center of pineal pituitary gland, and the fire descends with the Virgin Mary, the purified astral body of the thinking, with the 12 apostles, right? And that's the 12 cranial nerves and the 12 signs of the zodiac with the virgin pure thinking in the head. But you see here, we also know about the Kundalini that rises from below, the Ida Pingala and the Shashamna. The Ida Pingala, the positive electrical magnetic current, rises from below up, and then dives down to the deepest core and rises with the Shashamna, the central channel. But here is the heart, the abode of the true Kundalini of the world's mother. The power of the world mother, names given to Kundalini, the mystic yogic power. It is the buddhi, the ultimate compassion, wisdom, considered as active instead of a passive principle, which is generally when regarded only as the vehicle or casket of Supreme Spirit, the Atma. It's the electoral spiritual force, a creative power, which when aroused into action, can as easily kill as it can create. This is a footnote in the Voice of the Silence about the Kundalini and the World Mother. And remember, the idea of Skywalker from Star Wars originally came from the Voice of the Silence in the late 1800s, Kashara, or Skywalker, the goer, as explained in the 6th Adhyaya of that king of mystic works, Dhyana Shavari. The body of the yoga becomes as one formed of the wind, as a cloud from which limbs have sprouted out, after which the yogi beholds the things beyond the seas and stars. He hears the language of the devas, the angels, and comprehends it, and perceives what is passing in the mind of an ant. That's the walker of the sky. And when you reach this stage, the upper rung, the ladder of the mystic sounds appears. You hear the voice of the inner God, the higher self, in 7 manners. And she talks about these 7 sounds you would hear. The first, like a nightingale's sweet voice, chanting a song of parting. Is this the moon? These often have stages with the planets, like the moon. Then Venus. The second comes to the sound of a silver symbol of the Dhyanis, the Bodhisattva, the planetary angels, awakening the twinkling stars. That's Venus. And next is the plaint melodious of the ocean sprite imprisoned in its shell. Mercury, imprisoned in the shell of the head. Then the sun, and this is followed by the chant of the veena. Veena is the Indian stringed instrument, like a lute. The fifth, like the sound of a bamboo flute, shrills in thine ear, Mars. And then Jupiter, it changes next into a trumpet blast, very reminiscent of Revelations. And the Saturnian Saturn, the last vibrates like the dull rumbling of a thundercloud. So Blavatsky gives you these sounds to meditate on, that the seventh swallows all the other sounds, they die, and then are heard no more. And she talks about the Christian Rosicrucians experience, or being at the center, like the symbol of the Theosophical Society is the interlaced triangles of the hexagon or six-pointed star with an Ankh or Venus symbol at the center. Actually, the circle and the cross meet there in the eternal. This, you might say, the inner and outer, the higher and lower meet to birth this enlightenment. And so the symbol of the serpent biting its own tail with the Thor's hammer, the vortex within which is the interlaced triangles of spirit and matter, and the birth of the higher love, truth, manas. And she talks about this seventh swallowing all the other sounds, and when the six are slain at the master's feet are laid, then is the pupil merged into the one, becomes that one and lives therein. The six principles, meaning when the lower personality is destroyed or transformed, transmuted, composted, and the inner individuality is merged into and lost in the spirit, the seventh principle, the Atma. The disciple is one with Brahma or Atma. And this is the golden thread between all reincarnations. So before that path is entered, Blavatsky says, thou must destroy thy lunar body, cleanse thy mind body, and make clean thy heart. So this is the beginning of the voice of the silence. And the voice of the silence is basically emptiness practice. Kill out desire, but if thou killest it, take heed lest the dead it shall rise again. So she warns about how one has to become still and a learner. In the first degree of the esoteric school of Theosophy, as well as in the first class of Rudolf Steiner, you didn't talk. You entered the stream of the spiritual mind stream continuum in the eternal. You were touched by the eternal, and the ocean comes into the drop and the drop goes into the ocean, and we witness this. We're actively witnessing and transforming ourselves. And in the waters of renunciation and sacrifice and surrender, and the silencing by the voice of virtue. Virtue. And this leads us to the third part of the seven portals of the seven virtues. But right now we're in the first part. And silence thy thoughts and fix thy whole attention on the spiritual teacher and teaching, whom thou dost not see, but who thou feelest. And Blavatsky, Rudolf Steiner says, destroy your biography if you want to get initiated, which I've always thought of that it meant compost your biography. Blavatsky says, kill out in thyself all memory of past experience. Look not behind, or thou art lost. And one thinks of Orpheus going into Hades to redeem Eurydice, or Demeter trying to get Persephone out of the lower worlds of Hades, and that you're not supposed to look back, and that Orpheus looks back. The Orphic mysteries are all about this. Orpheus looks back and Eurydice goes back into the lower worlds. These are the deep mysteries of initiation, and the pupil must regain the child state he has lost ere the first sound can fall upon his ear or her ear. And that we lose our innocence to find our inner sense. That's the secret. You can't enter heaven unless you're childlike. And I think that's that kind of inner sense, or that innocence of the purest, deepest part of our eternal self, the stillness within us. We have to learn to be still, to distill our experience into the elixir of insight and wisdom and the courage to go on. until you can hear this voice of the silence, you can't see. And until you can see, you can't hear. To hear and see is the second stage, Blavatsky points out. And this is the first part of the voice of the silence, of where when the student can see and hear, when he smells and tastes, eyes closed, ears shut, mouth and nostrils stopped, then the four senses blend and ready are to pass into the fifth, that of the inner touch. Then into the stage of the fourth, he has passed on. This is kind of confusing, but it's really, you're going to the sixth and seventh. The fourth stage is really the stillness that can hold everything. In the fifth stage of those four, O slayer of thy thoughts, all of these, again, have to be killed out beyond reanimation or transformed into higher self. So thou art now the dharana, the sixth stage. So it's really the higher mind the higher thinking and universal mind transforms the lower thinking. The higher Buddha compassion transforms the lower feelings. And the Atma, the universal awe, transforms the body into the body of the universe. These are a little bit of keys that we can find in the first part of the voice of the silence, which is called the voice of the silence, where you become the doer and the witness, the radiator and the radiation, light in the sound and sound in the light, Blavatsky says. Where is the individuality, O Lanu or student? Where the student himself or herself? It is the spark lost in the fire, the drop within the ocean. The ever-present ray become the awe and the eternal radiance. This is very beautiful and poetic, and that's why you have to kind of meditate on it. And so she talks about the modes of truth, and I think she's talking about the Buddha's Four Noble Truths, that all existence is suffering, desire is the cause of suffering, fear is the shadow of desire, the cause of suffering. And then if you cease desiring, you'll cease suffering. And then there's the eightfold path of right thinking and right action and right work and the eightfold path where you hit the octave, the eighth one, the transform. And so here she says, hast thou not passed through the knowledge of all misery, truth the first? Yeah, that everything's suffering. A bell goes off once you see that all the existence is suffering. And then you have to ponder Blavatsky's next statement. Hast thou not conquered the Mara's king at Sai, the portal of assembling, truth the second? The portal of assembling, the king of Maras, the Mara, stands trying to blind the candidate by radiance of his jewel. So in other words, desire. She has her own form of saying that, that we're blinded by our desires. And everything's based on that assembling of desires of a false sense of self. And then she says, hast thou not sin? Sin is the act out of separateness. Hast thou not sin at the third gate destroyed, and truth the third attained? The truth is cease desiring, and you'll cease suffering. And by being still of desire and still of fear, and by being stilling the mind with selflessness and emptiness practice, seated in the heart, that one comes to this deeper way of going. And this is the third stage. And then she says, hast thou not entered Tao, the path? The fourth stage of the Buddha is the path, of the eightfold path, that leads to knowledge, the fourth truth. And Blavatsky says in the footnote, this is the fourth path out of the five paths of rebirth, which lead and toss all human beings into perpetual states of sorrow and joy. These paths are but subdivisions of the one, the path followed by karma. And now she says, rest neath the Bodhi tree. That's where Buddha got enlightenment. He tried everything and he just sat down in silence under the Bodhi tree, of which Rudolf Steiner says is a cerebellum. And, the head is the top of the tree, and the spine, the spine from the neck down to the heart. We sit in the heart. We sit in the heart between heaven and earth on the Bodhi tree, we rest in our central channel at the very midpoint, where Arjuna and Krishna are between the two mountains of the upper and lower third of our body. And I talk about that in the Bhagavad Gita talk, where we're sitting between opposites. The reconciliation of opposites is seated in the heart between the upper and lower, the forward and backward, the right and left, and we're the seventh principle there that every good Gothic cathedral can teach you if you stand at the transept and ponder where you are. Between the crypt below with the Virgin, the purified astral body, and the light pouring in from above of the Christos, the light of the Son of Deity, Day. And we're at those crossroads. We're standing on the cross like the Templars and in the middle of the Gothic cathedral. And here we are in this, trying to get to this way of the center. And this is also like being at the center between the upper three and the lower three, where I talked about earlier. It's the same kind of thing. So now beneath, Blavatsky says, and now rest neath the Bodhi tree, which is perfection of all knowledge. For know thou art the master of samadhi, the state of faultless vision, or desireless vision. Eh? Behold, thou hast become the light, thou hast become the sound. Thou art thy teacher, higher self, and thy God. Thou art thyself, the object of thy search, the voice unbroken that resounds through eternities, exempt from change, from sin exempt, the seven sounds in one. See, this is the center of silence within your deepest heart. It's this voice is silence, so the voice can never be broken or separated in parts. It's the lost word of the Masons and the Grail Knights. It resounds through eternity because the silence is eternal. It's space, the last frontier, inner space. What was, is, and always will be. Space, exempt from change, is changeless. And from sin or acting out of separateness, it's just a oneness. It's the father principle in Neoplatonism and Hermetics. It's the oneness that then enters into the cosmos and the sevenfold human being, the seven sounds in one, the voice of the silence. And Blavatsky says, the voice of the silence, Om Tat Sat, I am that Saturn, I am that eternal, that urn of eternal. And that ends the first fragment called the voice of the silence, where then it goes into the fragment 2, the two paths, the path of the eye and the heart, the path of self-individualization and self-enlightenment, and the path of the heart, where we have compassion for all, that we're not going to go to nirvana or heaven until everyone gets to go. It's that kind of like choice. Perhaps it's a choiceless choice, but there are two paths, and she talks about them. And then she goes into the third part, which is the seven portals, or the seven virtues, that are the seven awakeners of the chakras, and the seven virtues are the sevenfold rung or ladder that bridge together and marry heaven and earth. The 7 days of the week, the seven planetary stages of Rudolf Steiner's Saturn evolution, Saturday, Sunday, the sun evolution. So from Saturn, the oneness and darkness in the Philosopher's Stone, we go to the sun evolution of the spirit of the sun, the Christos, the Krishna, the Christos, the sun. And then we go to the moon evolution, and this is Moon Day, Monday. So Saturn Day, Sunday, Moon Day, and Tuesday and Wednesday are the Mars, Mercury. The Earth is between the Mars fighting and struggling and striving and desire and fear, going into Mercury, which is the higher love of knowledge, a love of knowledge and truth and presence and being interactive with each other, and that we're fellow students to help share the path. And then we go to Jupiter Day, Thor's Day, and Friday's Freya, Venus Day, and we're back to Saturn. So this is the seven portals, are the seven chakras. The upper, sitting in the heart, there's the higher three and the lower three. And it's from the heart that we can say, as above, so below, which links us all to the Hermetic tradition. The Neoplatonic tradition, again, the Hermetic and Neoplatonic and the Foundation Stone meditation, I talk of this in other lectures. So I've given you 30 minutes here. of me sharing the Voice of the Silence, which is a self-initiation manual that very few people understand. And I'm pretending, I'm pretending to understand it, actually. But I've studied it and read it dozens of times and thought about it over the years. And I want to share with you what I learned about it. It would take many hours to really go through it every step of the way, which I'm capable of trying. But right now, The Voice of the Silence, a self-initiation manual by H.P.Blavatsky. It's a beautiful book. This is part one of three parts that we're going to journey together into the three parts. So join me, subscribe, think about donating, think about looking me up at mayflowerbookshop.com. And this is The Voice of the Silence, an ultimate theosophical self-initiation manual. It's Rudolf Steiner and Blavatsky's idea that you need a spiritual teacher, but you don't too. You can be self-initiated since the late 1800s. But I think that we've all heard that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. But in this school of Theosophy, new Theosophy, perhaps it's renewed Theosophy, but based on the original Mahatmas and spiritual teachers and masters of wisdom and compassion, harmony of feelings. And the original scribe for the spiritual teachings and teachers of all ages, H.P. Blavatsky, her self-initiation manual, The Voice of the Silence. And she is the one who introduced to the West Om Mani Padme Hum. So Om, and then Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum is the transformation of the thinking, feeling, and willing through the higher self or the Om. So join me in part 2 and 3, where we'll enter into the 2 paths and the 7 portals. Om Tat Sat, I am that. Bless your heart. Om 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 Om.